My boy sat at the will readin' with that smug grin of his, sure I wouldn't see a penny of my ex-husband's $40 million. He leaned in close enough that I caught the faint spice of his cologne and the glint off those fancy cufflinks. "You gave up your rights the day you left, Mom," he breathed. "Don't expect a dime from Dad's estate." I kept quiet, staring straight at the lawyer across the glossy oak desk. Mr. Benton, gray hair, round glasses, eyes sharp as tacks, let out a little smile, almost like he was amused. Then he cleared his throat. "You might want to stay for this," he said. I didn't so much as blink. My hand stayed folded in my lap, exactly where they'd been since I'd walked in 15 minutes earlier. My name's Rachel A. Morgan. I'm 69 years old, and this is the story of how a funeral, a will, and a man I hadn't spoken to in 27 years turned my world upside down. That office was lined with books, some real, some just for show. Behind the lawyer's chair stood a tall window, letting in soft, golden afternoon light, the kind that tells you the day's nearly over. I'd driven 3 hours into Fairview that morning, not quite sure why, when the estate letter showed up in my mailbox. I almost tossed it aside. Felt like a mistake. I hadn't been part of Victor's life for more than 21 years. I skipped his second wedding. I didn't call when he hung up his career. I didn't ask for a thing when he opened offices in Brookhaven, and Milford. That chapter closed the day I packed my car in 2001 and drove away with the last $30 left in our joint account. He made his fortune after I was gone. At least, that's what people like to say. But I remember him different. The man who couldn't keep a checkbook straight, but could make a piano sing like it held all the world's secrets. I was there for the beginning, but when I left, I never turned back. Not until now. Caleb sat to my left, one leg crossed, staring at the door like he had a plane to catch. He wore a gray suit that fit too well, like it had been measured not just in inches, but in pride. At moments like that, I could hardly recognize him. The way he sat, the way he spoke, even the way he called me Mom, it all felt like theater. He hadn't bothered with a Mother's Day call in years. The receptionist had let us in just before noon. Caleb and I rode up the elevator in silence. He didn't speak until we sat down. "You really came," he muttered. "That's brave." I said nothing, just folded my coat on my lap and kept still. Then the lawyer straightened his papers and gave us both a look. "As you know, Victor Samuel Morgan passed on March 8, 2027, he began. "This document was written January 24th of this year, witnessed and notarized under Westbridge law." Caleb shifted, smiling already. The lawyer went on, but my mind had wandered. My eyes found a framed photo on the shelf. A courthouse, maybe his first case. I'd seen shelves like that too many times after my divorce, sitting across desks, asking what counted as mine and what didn't. Not that there'd been much to fight over back then. When I walked on Victor, he had one rental house, a worn Lexus, and the cafe we'd once run together, signed over to him just so I wouldn't have to argue. I left with an old Corolla, a few boxes of books, and my maiden name. Everything that came after, that was his doing. The hotels, the management firm, the retirement condos, the shiny office tower, all his. At least, that's the tale he liked to tell. The lawyer's voice cut back in. "As written in the will, both Rachel Morgan and Caleb Morgan are named beneficiaries." Caleb's eyebrow jumped, and I caught his smirk twitch. He looked at me like he knew some secret. "Don't let the word fool you," he whispered. "He probably left you a watch or an old record. Just wait." I kept my face steady, hands folded tight. The lawyer cleared his throat again and pulled a thick folder close. We'll start with the real estate, then the investments, and last, the personal designations. That's when his smile came. A small one, not mocking, not cruel, more like he knew what was about to land. You might want to stay for this. I didn't flinch. I'd weathered worse. But I sure didn't know just how deep this would cut, or how much of what I thought I knew was about to unravel one sentence at a time. And it all began in that quiet office, my son grinning at my side, and the lawyer holding back a laugh. These days I live in a rented duplex about 25 minutes from Milford, out by the Granite Hills. Quiet place, just trees, a gravel road, and a creek that floods the backyard when the rain lingers too long. The mail still comes by a man who knocks and waves, not a machine. It's not much, but it's mine where it counts. I've been here nearly 8 years. 2 bedrooms, though only one's lived in. The others piled with storage bins, photo albums, and a sewing machine I keep promising myself I'll use. Haven't yet. My day is run simple. I water the tomatoes, listen to the birds. Sometimes I sit out front with my neighbor Helen. She's 83, always got a story. We swap clippings from the newspaper and compare which joints gave us trouble that morning. I like it just like that. Quiet, easy, familiar. Most Sundays I walk down to the little First Harmony Chapel at the end of the road, not so much for the preaching, but for the music, the worn pews, and the way the pastor greets everyone by name. I drop in what I can when they pass the plate. The rest of the week I read. I scoop up books from the Second Chance Thrift off County Route 14, paperbacks with bent spines, cookbooks with someone else's scribbles in the margins. They keep me company better than most folks do these days. 2 weeks back, I was pulling weeds near the porch steps when the phone rang. I almost let it go. I figured it was another robocall about car insurance or some politician I didn't care about, but something made me pick up. "Is this Rachel Morgan?" a woman asked. "Yes, speaking. My name is Lydia." The voice on the line said, "I'm calling on behalf of the Morgan estate." I froze right where I stood. I wiped my hands on my jeans and lowered myself onto the porch step. "I'm sorry? Did you just say estate?" "Yes, ma'am. I'm calling to let you know Mr. Victor Morgan passed away on March 8th. You've been named in the execution of his will." I didn't answer right away. I hadn't spoken Victor's name out loud in years, not since Caleb's college graduation. And even then, all I had muttered was, "Your father will be there too," half under my breath. "I'm sorry for your loss," the woman added gently. I gave a small nod, though she couldn't see me. "Thank you," I whispered. The call didn't last long. She told me when and where the will reading would be held and stressed it was important I come. I'd twice asked her if she was sure there wasn't some mistake. "No, ma'am. You were listed by Mr. Morgan himself." When I hung up, I just sat there for a long time. The hose was still dripping into the dirt, and the sun had already started slipping behind the trees. Victor, gone. I hadn't laid eyes on him since 2001. That was the day I packed 2 boxes of clothes, a busted old microwave, and our son's birth certificate in the folder on the front seat, and drove away. The divorce wasn't kind. It wasn't tidy. We dragged each other through court like 2 strangers fighting over the same parking space. But deep down, I think we both knew it had been ending for a long while. Victor hadn't always been hard. When we first met, he carried a leather notebook full of dreams about opening a jazz club. Sundays, he'd play the piano and hum while folding laundry. But little by little, something in him shifted. The sound of money grew louder than the music. He got into commercial real estate, and before long, he stopped coming home before midnight. When he did walk through the door, he was quiet, short-tempered. He didn't ask about my day, didn't notice when I cut my hair, and then came the affairs. At first, just hints, a perfume on his shirt that wasn't mine, trips he called work, and then the proof showed up plain as day. I wasn't snooping, it was just there. One night I opened his briefcase for a tax form and out spilled the truth. Folded notes, hotel receipts, even a second cell phone. I confronted him once. He didn't deny it, just looked at me like I'd asked what he wanted for supper. "What do you want me to say?" he asked flatly. It happened. That was it. I stayed another 6 months, mostly for Caleb's sake. I kept hoping things would settle down, but they didn't. One day I loaded the car and drove away.
Caleb was 12. I told Victor I'd be in touch about custody, and I meant it. I raised Caleb alone for the next dozen years. For a while, we lived in an apartment behind a laundromat. Later, it was a trailer on the edge of town. I took a job managing a diner off the highway. We never had much, but we had each other. Until Victor started dangling things I couldn't give. Summer camps, a shiny new phone, a used car when Caleb turned 17. That's when Caleb began slipping away. I could hear it in the short answers, see it in the way he stared out the window during dinner. At 19, he told me he was moving in with his father full time. He understands how the world works, he said. I just nodded. Since then, I've only seen him a handful of times. Holidays, a birthday, here and there. Our talks are polite, but stiff. Every November, he sends me a check for expenses, signs it with his full name. No love, no mom, just Caleb T. Morgan. So when that call from the estate office came, I couldn't imagine why Victor would name me in anything. I figured it was just a courtesy, a formality, something small and legal. Still, I went, put on my best slacks, got in the car, and walked into that office expecting nothing at all. Then the lawyer smiled and said, "You might want to stay for this." So I did. Not because I wanted anything from Victor, but because some part of me still wondered why, after all these years, he'd remembered me at all. Back before the money, before the lawyers, before the bitterness, Victor was a man who played the piano like he meant every note. We first crossed paths in Harborview, Louisiana, summer of '72. I was working in a little gift shop downtown, selling postcards and handmade candles. He wandered in asking directions to a jazz club, wore a baggy linen shirt and carried sheet music rolled in his hand. We struck up a conversation, and he invited me to hear him play that night. I didn't go. But the next day, he came back, brought me a sweet tea, and asked again. That time I said yes. He wasn't famous, not even close, but the moment he sat down at the piano, the whole room shifted. He didn't play for applause. He played because it was the only way he knew how to speak. I watched him from the corner, hand on my drink, hand on my knee, and thought, this man lives inside the music. We started courting soon after. Long walks through downtown, late-night breakfasts at Sunnyside Diner. He hummed soft tunes when I was tired, his fingers brushing my wrist as we sat on the porch. He dreamed big, said he'd open a cafe, not just for coffee and sandwiches, but for music, a place where folks could feel something real. I believed in him. I believed in that dream. We married in the spring of '74. We didn't have much. My dress cost $55. His suit sagged a little at the shoulders. But we laughed through the whole ceremony. We were in love, and that felt like enough. By 76, we opened the Bluebird Room, just 2 small rooms, a piano in the corner, second-hand furniture, and black and white jazz photos on the walls. I baked sweet rolls at home, and we served them with coffee and sandwiches. On Friday nights, Victor would play for hours, folks clapping along, sipping cheap wine. Sometimes local kids showed up with guitars or harmonicas and joined right in. It wasn't fancy, but it had heart. Those years were the sweetest of my life. Caleb came along in 78. I still see Victor's tears the first time he held him, promising our boy would learn piano, promising he'd carry music in his blood. But by the early 80s, things began to shift. It started small. Victor picked up extra gigs outside the cafe, weddings, luncheons, business parties. Then a friend talked him into vending machines. That turned into a used car lot. After a while, it wasn't the cafe anymore. It was rental houses, a storage business, even a car wash. The piano just sat there, gathering dust. He still touched the keys now and then, but it wasn't the same. Not out of happiness, just out of routine, and only when nobody was watching. One day I asked him if he ever missed it. He told me, "Music doesn't pay the bills, Ray." That cut deep. We used to tell each other it was never about the money. The cafe started slipping, not because folks stopped loving it, but because his time was being poured somewhere else. Eventually, he sold it. Never even asked me. He just walked through the door one day and said it was over, said it was time to move up. I can still see myself standing there in our cramped little kitchen, dish towel in my hand, staring at him like I didn't know who I'd married anymore. His clothes got fancier, he carried a briefcase, stopped singing in the shower, stopped holding my hand in public. When I lost the baby in 84, he wasn't even home, off in Brookhaven for some real estate conference. I called him from the hospital. He said he'd try to grab the next flight. He never made it in time. I laid in that hospital bed all by myself, staring at the ceiling, fighting the tears, while the nurse kept handing me forms to sign. When he finally showed up, the first thing he said was, "You should have called sooner." I didn't answer. What could I say? After that, we barely spoke unless it was about bills, groceries, or Caleb's school. I started writing in a journal, just so it felt like somebody was listening. I can't tell you the exact moment the affairs began. There was no big scene, no fight, just hints. Late-night texts, his phone always face down on the table, receipts for dinners I didn't cook, jewelry I never wore. One night I waited out on the porch until he came home at 3 a.m. I asked him if he loved somebody else. He didn't look ashamed, only worn out. He said, "I don't know. Does it matter?" I didn't yell, didn't break a thing. I just nodded, walked inside, and slept in Caleb's room. The next day I started packing. I took what I could carry and left the rest. Caleb was 12. I told him we were moving someplace quieter, that his daddy would see him when he could. Victor didn't fight me, didn't argue, didn't even ask. He just signed the custody papers and went back to business. Sometimes I think he felt lighter, like he'd finally cleared space for the next step in his life. But now and then, when I let myself think on it, I picture him alone at that cafe piano, late at night, playing something soft. Not for the crowd, not for me, but because he missed who he used to be. I chose silence over pain, but I never stopped hearing that piano in my head. Caleb was mine for a while, not just by law or blood, but truly mine. I raised him in the years that counted, the years of scraped knees and school plays, when those things mattered more than stocks and fancy suits. Caleb was curious, always full of questions. He loved toy dinosaurs, peanut butter sandwiches with the crust cut off, and bedtime stories where I'd change the endings to make him laugh. Saturdays, we'd go to the public library and spend half the day on the carpet with books. He liked his routines, his quiet, and holding on to me just a little longer before school. When I left Victor, Caleb climbed in the car without hesitation. He never asked why we were leaving, not right then. He just pulled on his blue hoodie, grabbed his backpack, and got in. I'm not sure if he understood. Truth is, I wasn't sure myself. At first, we lived in small places, one-bedroom rentals, a double-wide for a stretch, later a little cottage behind someone's garage. I took shifts at diners, scrubbed houses on weekends. We didn't have much, but Caleb never complained. I kept the fridge full, told him stories at night. I showed up to every school meeting, every science fair, every choir performance.
Victor sent money now and then, always on time, just a signature at the bottom, no notes. At first, I felt torn about cashing those checks, but Caleb needed shoes, books, braces. The money helped. By 14, things started shifting. Victor had moved into a big place by then. 4 bedrooms, a pool, a theater room. That New Year's, he sent Caleb a plane ticket. I didn't love the idea, but I told myself it was good for Caleb to know his father's world, too. He came back with new clothes and tales about ski slopes and fancy dinners. He called it a resort trip, though it was just Brookhaven in November. That's not snowboarding, I told him. That's falling on expensive hills. He laughed, but I could tell something inside him had changed. I saw it in the way he looked around our little rental. He didn't say a mean word, not yet, but he noticed more. The chipped paint, the dented fridge, the missing dishwasher. The next summer, Victor paid for him to go to a leadership camp in Nevada. Then came tennis lessons, coding camp, private SAT tutors. By 17, he was with his father more than me. I tried my best to hold on. I cooked his favorite meals. I sat with him at night even when he rolled his eyes. I kept showing up, even when he stopped asking. He still called me Mom, but it felt more like a word than a name. By 19, he was planted squarely in Victor's world. He wore cufflinks to prom. He repeated business podcasts over breakfast. He told me I ought to refinance my car. He once said, "Mom, you need to stop living like it's 1977. The world's different now." I just nodded. What else was there to do? He got into Evergreen University. Victor covered the tuition, bought him an SUV, co-signed a lease for a high-rise apartment in Fairview. I mailed him a care package, socks, snacks, a handwritten note. He never mentioned it. The first call I got from him was just to ask for his social security number. After that, it was what I call calendar contact. Holidays, birthdays, maybe a text here and there. He never said a cruel word, never raised his voice, but the warmth was gone. What was left was polite, distant, efficient. His father's son. The last time we truly talked, I asked him if he ever missed that little house with the garden gnome out front. He told me, "That place was cute, Mom, but honestly, I was embarrassed to bring friends over." That one cut me deep, though I kept my face steady. I only said, "I always liked that gnome." He laughed. "You're still sentimental." For a long time, I thought maybe one day he'd tire of all that pressure, that he'd come back to something simple, maybe show up at my door asking for a recipe, a blanket, or just to sit and talk. But he never did. He grew into everything Victor wanted. Sharp suits worth more than my rent, first-class flights, a girlfriend high up in marketing. They live in a condo where the elevator opens right into the kitchen. I keep my distance. Sometimes I look him up on LinkedIn. I see the speeches, the awards, the gala photos. There's one picture of him shaking hands with a senator, another with Victor beside him, both smiling like they'd never known struggle. I wonder if he remembers those nights on the couch with popcorn watching Matlock, or how he'd fall asleep in the back seat after school and I'd carry him inside even though he was already too heavy. I wonder if he remembers who sewed his first Halloween costume, who held his hand at dentist visits, who stayed up half the night fixing his college essay. Probably not. He became his father's mirror, and I turned into a ghost in my own story. So when he looked across that lawyer's desk and told me, "You gave up your rights the day you walked out," I didn't even flinch, because I knew the truth, something he didn't. I never walked out on him. I walked away from a man who quit the piano. And sometimes, that's the only choice left. The chapel stood on a hill above the city, stone walls and white pillars, all neat and cold, the way money always is. A place where voices stay low and shoes are meant to shine. I parked at the back, far from the black SUVs and polished sedans. Mine was the only car with a cracked bumper and a seat cover I'd stitched myself. I walked in alone. The place was crowded, nearly every pew taken. Men in dark suits, women in heels and pearls. Phones tucked away, but never off. A few looked up as I walked the side aisle. Some faces I recognized from the old days, back when I still stood beside Victor. Their eyes caught mine, then turned back to their programs without a flicker of warmth. I slipped into a seat at the back. The pew was stiff, the air heavy, but I sat tall. I didn't wear black, only a navy coat and plants. I wasn't there to impress. At the front was Victor's photo in silver frame. He looked younger there, maybe 50, smiling just enough to seem open, but not so much as to look soft. That was his way, controlled warmth even after death, always selling something. I didn't shed tears. I already cried years ago. Kitchens, parking lots, motel rooms. This was just one more stop on a road I never thought I'd be walking again. The service began. A business partner, a longtime employee, someone from city council. They all spoke. They praised his vision, his growth, his discipline, how he turned nothing into something. Words like strategic and determined floated through the air. Then Caleb took the podium. He belonged up there. Sharp suit, steady back, calm face. His voice carried strong, the kind of voice that had practice being heard. My father was the kind of man who saw opportunity where others saw walls. He said his father wasn't just building a business, but a legacy. He talked for 15 minutes, every word polished. Values, discipline, hard work, gratitude for the people who believed in his father's vision. Not once did he mention family. Not once did he mention me. I didn't expect it. When he finished, the applause was soft, polite, approval without heart. I kept my hands folded in my lap. Afterwards, I stood off to the side as the crowd filed out. I didn't seek anyone out, didn't share stories. I was just there. Caleb found me before I slipped away. He leaned close, voice even, but eyes sharp. "You shouldn't have come." I looked him straight back. "I came to pay my respects." "He wouldn't have wanted you here. He walked away." I held my tongue for a moment. I wanted to say, "He walked away first,"
But there was no point. He didn't leave you anything, Caleb added, so don't get any ideas. Just don't make a scene. I almost smiled. I'm not here for money, Caleb. I was married to that man for 27 years. That counts for something, whether you believe it or not. He shook his head. This is business. Don't make it into a pity party. Then he turned and left before I could answer. I stood there, then walked out the side door. The wind had picked up, the sky heavy with rain. I didn't go straight home. I pulled over near the lawyer's office 2 blocks away and sat for a while watching the city hurry past. People in suits, women in heels, checking watches, clutching coffee cups like stage props. At 5 o'clock, I walked inside. Same polished floors, same quiet receptionist. She led me down a hall into a room with a long table and leather chairs. Caleb was already there at the far end, a tablet in front of him. The lawyer, Mr. Benton, nodded at me. Glad you could join us, Mrs. Morgan. I gave a polite smile and sat across from my son. He said nothing. The air felt tight. A pitcher of water stood untouched in the middle of the table. A stack of folders lay by Mr. Benton's arm. He slipped off his glasses, wiped them with a cloth, and looked at us both. Well, Mr. Benton said with a small smile, let's begin. Caleb straightened in his chair like a man waiting for a crown. I sat still, not expecting much, but bracing all the same, because something in that smile told me this wouldn't go the way anyone thought. Mr. Benton opened the folder with slow, steady hands, like this was just another ordinary day at the office. Maybe it was for him, but for me and Caleb, everything in that room was about to change. He adjusted his glasses, glanced at the first page, and read aloud. This is the last will and testament of Victor Samuel Morgan, signed and notarized January 22nd, 2027. Caleb leaned back, arms crossed, a smirk tugging at his mouth. You could see it plain. He was already picturing what he'd spend, where he'd invest, how he'd make his mark with that inheritance.
The lawyer cleared his throat and went on. To my son, Caleb Thomas Morgan, I leave the lake house in Greenwood County, Eastmont, with all its furnishings. I also leave him $400,000 in securities from my investment accounts. Caleb gave a quick nod, like he'd already counted that money. Benton kept reading. These gifts are contingent upon Caleb's continued service as Chief Executive Officer of Morgan Real Estate Group for a minimum of 4 years after my death or until the company is sold or dissolved. Failure to meet this condition will result in forfeiture of both property and bequest. That one stopped Caleb cold. His head jerked up, eyes narrowing. Excuse me? His voice was calm, but it carried an edge. He wanted what? Mr. Benton looked up. It's clear. You must remain in your current role for at least 4 years, unless the company is sold or legally dissolved. Otherwise, everything reverts to the estate. Caleb scoffed. He knew I was planning to step down. We talked about it. I can only go by the document, Benton replied evenly, and this is what your father signed. Caleb straightened his tie, trying to recover his footing. He hated surprises. Victor must have known that. Benton turned another page. To my former wife, Rachel Ann Morgan. The room froze. Even Caleb stilled. I leave her the controlling 52% ownership of Morgan Real Estate Group, including voting rights and board authority. I also leave her the residential property at 23 Maple Grove Lane, Brookhaven, Georgia, and $40 million in liquid assets held in trust since 2006 under her name. I blinked hard, thought I'd misheard.
The words had to circle my mind a few times before they settled. Caleb turned toward me, stunned. His mouth opened, shut, then opened again. "You've got to be kidding," he finally managed. Mr. Benton didn't look up. He flipped the page and kept on, but Caleb wasn't hearing a word. "You expect me to believe this," he snapped, glaring now at me. "This is a joke. Some kind of mistake?" I stayed quiet. My hands were knotted in my lap, frozen still. "This is ridiculous," he barked, rising to his feet. "She had nothing to do with the business. She's not even supposed to be in the will. She left. She wasn't there for us." He pointed straight at me, like I was an obstacle in his way. "You probably talked him into it. Showed up after all these years pretending to care. You think I'll believe he handed over the company to you out of guilt?" I said softly, "Oh, come on." "You left," he snapped. Mr. Benton raised his voice just enough. "Mr. Morgan, please sit down. There's more." Caleb didn't budge. "There must be a newer version, some side agreement. Dad was too smart for this. He wouldn't leave the business with her. She doesn't even know how it works." Benton didn't flinch. "Your father expected this. That's why he recorded a video message to be played today." I turned to him slowly. "A video?" "Yes," he said. "Recorded a few weeks before his death. He wanted you both to see it." Caleb dropped back into his chair, face red with anger and disbelief. "Play it," he growled. "Let's hear this nonsense." Benton pulled a tablet from his desk, tapped the screen and set it up so we both could see. And there he was, Victor, sitting in a leather chair, dressed in a plain black sweater. No tie, no jewelry, just him. His hair was thinner, his face lined and tired, but his eyes, they were sharp as ever, clear as glass. "If you're watching this, then I'm gone. And if you're sitting there together, then things went just how I planned." He leaned in a little closer. "Caleb, I imagine you're upset. You probably think this is a mistake. It's not. I made this choice after years of thought. This isn't revenge. It's about putting things where they belong." He paused, then looked square into the camera. "Rachel, I never gave you the credit you deserved. Not for the early years, not for standing beside me when all I had was music and a coffee machine. You held us together while I chased the dream. And when I lost myself, you didn't just survive. You carried our boy when I wasn't man enough to do it." My throat burned, but I didn't look away. "I built something, yes, but you were the one who laid the first bricks, and I never once said thank you." He sat back a little. "So this is me saying it now. The company, the assets, the trust, they go to you, because I want what's left of my name in the hands of someone who knows the worth of things money can't buy." Then he turned toward the camera again. "Caleb, you already have everything you need. Every door has been opened for you, but there's a difference between building and inheriting. Maybe one day you'll see that." The screen went dark. Silence dropped heavy over the room. I stared down at my folded hands. Caleb didn't speak. And Mr. Benton? He simply leaned back, stacked the papers neatly, and waited. Caleb looked as if the very ground had tilted beneath him. His jaw tightened, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at the table, lips pressed together like he was holding back a storm. I stayed quiet, still trying to process everything I'd just heard. Mr. Benton let the silence hang a moment. Then, as if he'd handled scenes like this countless times, he pulled a sealed envelope from the folder and placed it gently in front of him. "Here's one more thing," he said. Victor had left a handwritten letter addressed to both of us. Benton glanced at me, then at Caleb, who still hadn't moved. He opened the envelope and unfolded the pages, reading in that steady voice of his, the voice that made hard truths sound inevitable. "To Rachel and Caleb, if you're hearing this, I've already said what I needed to on video, but I wanted to leave you something more personal, something not scripted by lawyers or tied up in business terms." He paused briefly, then continued. "Rachel, I owe you more than you ever asked for. You were there when there was no empire, when I was scraping together tips from playing the sax in coffee shops to buy groceries. You didn't care about money. You cared about me, about the music, about what we were building, and I threw it away chasing more. I saw other men with newer suits, bigger offices, and I let myself change. I told myself I was doing it for us, then for Caleb, but the truth is, I did it because I thought I wasn't enough." His words hit hard, not because I hadn't known them deep down, but because I'd never heard him admit it aloud. "You warned me in your own way. You tried to slow me down, told me we were losing something important, and I didn't listen. I traded something real for something shiny. I've lived with that silence ever since." Mr. Benton paused again. Caleb shifted slightly, jaw still set, eyes locked on the tabletop, bracing himself. "Caleb, you grew up in a world where everything had a price tag. I gave you the best schools, the right mentors, the perfect path, but I never taught you how to slow down, how to listen. I watched you become the man I used to be, the man who sees people as positions, who wins every meeting but misses the point." Mr. Benton's voice softened as he read, "That's on me. I take responsibility. I thought I was protecting you from struggle, but I robbed you of perspective. Now, in this final hour, I see it for what it is. You may not understand today, you may not agree, but this is my apology, my will, and my final correction." I looked at Caleb. His hands were clenched in his lap. He wasn't the calm executive anymore. He was a son realizing the ground he'd been standing on was shakier than he thought.
"Rachel," the letter said, "you were the only one who kept me human. You didn't just stand beside me, you steadied me. I didn't know how to appreciate it then, but I know now. That's why this is yours. Not out of guilt, not out of regret, but because I know you'll do the right thing. You always did." The room was quiet. Real quiet. Not the kind where people wait their turn to speak, but the kind where truth finally lands and everyone is still. Mr. Benton folded the letter and slid it across the table to me. "It's yours to keep," he said. I took it with both hands. Caleb finally spoke. "So that's it?" he said, voice low but sharp. That's how he ends it. Mr. Benton said nothing. Caleb stood slowly, straightening his jacket. But he looked smaller now, diminished somehow, like those words had chipped away at something he thought untouchable. He didn't look at me. "This is wrong," he said, confused, maybe even sickened. "No," I said quietly. He was clear. He shook his head and moved toward the door. Before leaving, he paused. You think this makes you the hero? Makes up for walking out? I looked at him. I don't think it makes me anything. I think it just makes it honest. He didn't answer. He just opened the door and walked out. I sat there a while longer, the envelope in my lap, the chair across from me empty. For the first time in over 21 years, I felt something shift. Not revenge, not triumph, just release. Victor hadn't given me his business. He'd given me back my story. Caleb returned minutes later, footsteps sharp on the tile. His face was red, as if he'd been holding his breath too long. He dropped into the chair across from me, leaning forward with elbows on the table. "This isn't over," he said. His voice carried a sharp edge I hadn't heard since he was a teenager, slamming doors over curfews. "I'm not letting this stand." Mr. Benton raised an eyebrow but remained silent. Caleb continued. "She has no claim to this. None. He must have been confused when he signed the will. Maybe he was pressured. Maybe you," he pointed at me, "twisted him around before he died?" I shook my head. "I haven't spoken to him in 27 years. Caleb laughed, bitter. "Oh, come on. And I'm supposed to believe that after all this time, out of nowhere, he leaves you control of everything? $35 million? The company?" His voice cracked on the word company. Mr. Benton cleared his throat. "Mr. Morgan, I assure you, your father's will was prepared with the utmost care. He underwent a full medical evaluation 8 weeks prior to signing. Both mental and physical health were certified by 2 separate physicians." Caleb spun sharply toward the lawyer. "You're telling me he was completely of sound mind when he wrote this? When he decided to throw away years of my effort and hand it all to—" He hesitated, glancing at me. "Someone who hasn't been part of the family for decades?" Mr. Benton remained composed. "Your father made every decision deliberately. He reviewed the terms repeatedly and confirmed his wishes in writing and on record." Caleb stood again, running a hand through his hair. He paced back and forth like a man looking for something to shatter. "This is madness," he muttered. "He built all of this with me. I worked for him. I gave up opportunities because he asked. And now he gives it all to you." He stopped, pointing at me. "You don't deserve this." I stayed quiet. I knew arguing with rage only fed it. "You think this makes up for the years you abandoned us? You left. You quit on Dad. You quit on me." I met his gaze evenly. "Caleb, I left a marriage that was killing me. That's not the same." He scoffed. "Oh, save it. This is just some twisted way for him to make you the victim." His words stung, but I held firm. There was nothing I could say to change the story he had grown up believing, where I walked out without looking back. In his mind, I was the one who gave up, not the one who tried to hold everything together until it broke. Caleb's voice rose. "I'm going to fight this. I don't care how long it takes. I'll get it overturned. The business is mine. You know it." Mr. Benton finally spoke. "You are free to pursue legal action, of course, but this will is solid. Every step was documented. Your father was clear in his intent." Caleb clenched his jaw. For a moment, I thought he might shout again. Instead, he pointed at me, hand trembling. "You're nothing but a washed-up ex-wife with a checkbook you didn't earn." It cut deep, but I didn't flinch. I whispered, "I earned every penny quietly, in silence." He didn't know how to respond. His face hardened, but he said nothing. He grabbed his tablet and stormed out, slamming the office door behind him. Silence settled over the room again. I stared at the table grain, letting the air clear. For the first time in 27 years, I felt something I hadn't felt since before the divorce. I felt seen. Not as the ex-wife, not as the woman who left, not as someone who couldn't keep up with Victor's world, but as someone who had been there at the start.
when there was nothing but a piano, a notebook, and a dream. I had been part of that foundation. I had carried the weight no one else noticed. And now, decades later, Victor was finally acknowledging it. Mr. Benton leaned forward. "Rachel, I know this is a lot to absorb. We can schedule a follow-up to review all the financial and legal details if you'd like." I nodded. Yes, that would help. "You don't have to decide immediately. The trust is in place. The shares in the company are yours. You have time to consider how to manage them." I leaned back, holding the envelope with Victor's letter. The numbers, properties, and power he left me felt distant, almost surreal. What mattered was the apology. The way he said I kept him human. The long overdue thank you. Outside, the late afternoon sun hit my face as I stepped from the building. I paused on the steps and drew a deep breath. My life had shifted in ways I couldn't fully name, not because of money, but because a door I thought locked forever had been opened, if just slightly. For the first time in years, I carried my own story. It took me 4 weeks before I returned to the Maple Grove property. The lawyer had mailed the keys by certified mail, tucked in a plain envelope with a typed note confirming the title transfer. Sitting at my kitchen table, I opened it and stared at the old brass key in my hand, just sitting there. The weight of it felt heavier than I expected. I hadn't thought about that house in years. Not truly. I knew Victor had kept it as a rental over time. It had been updated, repainted, landscaped to match the neighborhood standards. But back in 1977, it had been a modest brick house on a quiet street. A starter house when all we had was hope for each other. Driving up the driveway, it all looked more polished than I remembered. Trimmed hedges, shutters painted deep navy. The magnolia tree in the yard still stretched wide, tall and proud. I climbed the front steps slowly, gripping the key tightly. Inside, a lemony, faintly floral scent greeted me. The house was empty yet alive. It seemed to hold the echoes of every family that had lived there. Hardwood floors, fresh paint, granite counters. None of the avocado kitchen or orange shag carpet of our past, but the bones remained. I wandered in silence from room to room, living room, hallway, back bedroom that had been Caleb's nursery. I traced the door frames, remembering the pencil marks where we measured his height. I touched the window ledge in the dining room where Victor once set his coffee while reading the Sunday paper. Then I stepped into the study, a home office now with built-in shelves and a large oak desk. On the desk was a sealed envelope with my name on it. My heart skipped. The handwriting was Victor's, slanted, neat, unmistakable. I sat and carefully opened it. "Rachel, if you're reading this, it means you came back. I wasn't sure you would, but I hoped you might. I wanted you to see the house. I kept it all these years. I had chances to sell it, but I couldn't. Something about this place always reminded me of who we used to be." I paused, blinking hard, letting the words sink in before continuing. "There's something in the den I want you to see," he wrote. "I never got rid of it. Couldn't. It always reminded me of you. If you still remember how to play that song, maybe give it one more try. V."
I folded the letter and held it in my lap, letting the weight of it settle. My chest was tight as I rose and walked down the hall to the den. And there it was, the old upright piano, the same one we'd rescued from a thrift store in downtown Mobile in 1977. The bench had fresh upholstery, but the piano itself bore the same chipped corner and worn keys, a fingerprint of its history. I hadn't touched it in over 21 years. I lifted the lid, brushed the dust off the keys.
They were slightly out of tune, but still alive. My fingers hovered above them, hesitant. Then, on impulse, I pressed the first few notes. The sound was fragile at first, shaky, but familiar. The song he had written for me back in the spring of 1977. We'd called it Rachel's Waltz. He had played it the night we signed the papers for this house, a moment when the world felt vast and possible, before ambition and fear crept in. I played slowly, deliberately, letting each note hang in the quiet room. I didn't cry. I didn't force a smile. I just listened as the music returned, fragment by fragment, a reminder of everything I thought I'd lost. Memories drifted back. The hopeful bride, the exhausted mother, the woman packing in silence, the one erased from the story, and now the one who returned. I hadn't come for revenge, for money, or even for validation. I came because I had been there at the start. And now, in the quiet hum of the piano, it felt as though we had both been granted the ending we deserved. He left me the choice, and I played the final note. So I'll ask you this. What would you do if the person who broke your heart left you their legacy? Would you walk away, or would you sit down and play?